One of the most frequent questions we're asked about expedition cruises is whether middle-aged or older people with moderate levels of fitness are a good fit for trips to the more remote places on the planet. The short answer is yes, but I thought I'd seek out the advice of an expert to chat this through. I'm Bob Bradley from the Pampered Cruiser, and if you'd like to book an expedition cruise or really any other river, small ship ocean, or package land tour, then we'd love to help you out. We know the products and the destinations very well, and we can always get you some additional amenities that are not available on direct bookings. Also, click on the link below to sign up for our weekly free email newsletter that features travel tips, informative articles, and exclusive offers delivered straight to your mailbox every Friday. In this video, I speak with Alex McNeil, the Chief Expedition Officer for HX, who've been taking people to the remote corners of the world for over 100 years. In this wide-ranging discussion, we talk about what an expedition cruise actually is, what type of people end up on these cruises, where expedition ships go, the difference between an expedition cruise and other small ship ocean cruises, and many other things. We also get into the details of the HX expedition ships and what a typical day looks like on an expedition cruise. Alex McNeil, Chief Expedition Officer for HX. How do you get a title like that?
Oh my gosh, you win the lottery, it feels like. I mean, it's the best job in the world.
Yeah, you've been at it for a while, I assume, to achieve that title.
I have, yeah, almost 20 years in the business now, and the first 10 to 15 exploring the far corners of the planet, trying to learn a thing or two along the way. And yeah, I guess I did something right because I ended up here.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, apparently I'm talking to the right guy then. So, and HX, you've got your uniform on today. Yeah, you're wearing your stuff.
Yeah.
So people might not have heard of it. No, new brand, but not a new company. So maybe give us just a little bit on HX and where they've come from.
Yes, HX has been around for 130 years. Our first expedition was actually in 1896. So when I was working in the field, one of my passions was history. And so I used to present on history very enthusiastically. And I was always fascinated by these Norwegian explorers. Some people might have heard of Roald Amundsen, the first person to reach the South Pole, Fridtjof Nansen, first to ski across Greenland. And their stories were just so compelling. And they came of age at the same time as our company. In fact, there was some cross-pollination of their captains were our captains. And it's a brand with just such a rich heritage that we carry with us through to this day, and it inspires a lot of what we do.
Awesome. Yeah, and for folks maybe that, so you mentioned Roald Amundsen, which you have one ship called that, and Fridtjof Nansen,
Yes.
which you have another ship named that one.
Yes.
But people may have heard of the Hurtigruten brand, even though I haven't been able to say it, but they might have.
You nailed it.
They might have seen it around. So this is just by way of saying the brand has evolved, and the expedition side of that business. So the Norwegian coastal bit, I think they still go by Hurtigruten.
They've kept the name Hurtigruten. Yeah. Our friends over there still doing great things with the ferry service along the coast. We're kind of the blue water fleet going out exploring the world and just bring it to life for folks.
Yeah. So for people maybe that are watching now and they're afraid that they have to be that sort of, hardcore expedition types, because expedition in some ways is a bit of an unfortunate word, because we think about guys like Roald Amundsen, when in fact certainly the expedition, I've been on your ships, and certainly when I've been on their ships, there's a bunch of old fat people like me on board, right? It's you don't have to be an Olympic level athlete. So who ends up on an HX expedition ship?
I've had the pleasure of bringing people as young as 8 years old and as old as in their 90s. There's one fantastic story. It was there was a gentleman. He was a World War II veteran. This is 10 or 15 years ago, and he was in his 90s. And he came alone. His name was Bob. He's from the U.S. and he came alone. And he just had always wanted to see the Antarctic. And he was on the ship. This was I think it was like a 12-day trip. And on one of the evenings, we had a gathering, and there was music. And he leant over to me, and he was like, I used to be a jitterbug champion. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. He was like, dancing. And he walked with a cane, and he was like, I'll show you. And he stood up out of his seat. He threw his cane on the floor, and he was like 94 years old. And then all of a sudden he started doing this jitterbug. So, anyone, this is accessible adventure. This is inspired by these explorers. You can literally walk in their footsteps, pursue the same ambitions that they had, the same curiosity drives a lot of the people who choose to travel with us, but you do not need to endure great hardship. You're not gonna freeze. You're gonna have a lovely and very comfortable time.
Yeah, and that's actually you use the word curiosity, and it seems to me that that's the number one prerequisite of people wanting to explore the more remote corners of the world is you have to be curious. You don't have to be an Olympic level athlete to go to Antarctica or to Greenland or the Northwest Passage or these places that are viewed well, they are remote. But just because they call it an expedition cruise doesn't mean that you have to have been to Everest Base Camp.
No, no.
Yeah.
And that word curious is something I just want to linger on for a moment because it's
Yeah.
something we take very, very seriously. Because candidly, there are companies out there that cater to people who want to go and just have this experience and have a story to tell at the dinner table to impress their friends. I mean, look at these fantastic destinations I went to, and we take our responsibility as the vehicle to get people there and to expose them to these beautiful places very seriously. And we want to satisfy people's curiosity. We want them to learn. We want their journey to have a purpose. I mean, this is going back to that explorer comparison. Is that they were venturing out to discover something. These were voyages of discovery, not voyages of indulgence.
Yes.
And you can still get these fantastic dinner party stories. There's no shortage of that. But you can be on a journey with a purpose, and you can satisfy your curiosity to whatever extent you so desire.
Yeah, it's an important distinction too, because one of the things I noticed. So I was on board Roald Amundsen in Alaska. So again,
Yeah.
certainly not as remote as Antarctica or the
Still,
Northwest Passage, but nevertheless, Alaska, British Columbia, big places
yeah,
with lots of wide open space in between. And yes, there were a number of people on board. There were out in the Zodiac boats and then doing the kayaking, and then there were some people on board that were really quite happy just to take in the magnificent scenery in that corner of the world from the deck of the ship, right? So they just
yeah,
enjoyed the comfort that ship offers, and they weren't getting in and out of kayaks, but they had a different experience than I had, but it was every bit as good. So it's sort of like a way to cater to people of very wide fitness levels, and I'm guessing it would probably be the same in Antarctica for you all.
yeah, definitely. And you mentioned out on deck with the fantastic outer deck spaces, but also I think a difference between mainstream cruising and expedition cruising is often mainstream cruise vessels are built to focus on the shipboard amenities, the restaurants, the dining, the casinos, the shopping. And so it's almost in a way inward looking, certainly in comparison to expedition vessels where you have these big floor to ceiling windows. And I'm sure you've been in our sauna on Roald Amundsen. It's just this like panoramic
Yeah.
view out into this remote nature, or the lounges. The majority of the interior spaces are designed to take in what's happening outside. That's I think, and I'd be curious to hear your feedback on this. I think that's something that's more specific or more amplified in the expedition space.
I absolutely agree. And I think so. We keep talking about Roald Amundsen. So Nansen is the identical sister ship, and of course HX has other
Yes.
ships as well. But
Yeah.
those are the ones. Those are the two ships. They get the buzz because they're the hybrid ships.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really struck me about that vessel was it brings outdoors in. So you can't really. There's not many places on that vessel where you can't see outside. And I've been, and
Yeah.
it's no small thing because I've been on other expedition vessels, and I'm not going to name names. The
Yeah.
and they're lovely ships. They're lovely
Yeah.
ships that go to many of the same places that HX goes. But it feels like more of a regular cruise ship. So you don't get that outdoor bringing in, if you like. And so that's something that really struck me about that particular vessel, about Amundsen, and again, by extension, Nansen too, just because she's
Yeah.
the identical sister.
Yeah. Yeah. Some companies do it better than others. It's something that we took really seriously in the design and consideration process for
Yeah.
building these ships. I mean, it's another thing that 130 years of expedition heritage and knowing what it means to take people to these places.
Hmm.
can be. So yeah, I'm glad you noticed those design elements.
Yeah, the other thing I noticed too is so again, it doesn't have the casino and some of the, there's no shuffleboard. Well, there might be shuffleboard. I don't, it's not like
No shuffleboard.
yeah, I was going to say it's not the love boat that you're going on when you
No.
board one of these vessels. And one of the other things that really struck me was, so again, many people, not all people, many people that end up on expedition ships, they're interested in the citizen science programs and being able to participate in there's always scientific research going on and whatnot. And many expedition ships have some small corner where the scientists hang out and do. It's a whole deck, or it seems to be a whole deck
Yeah.
and there's big microscopes and other pieces of equipment that you as a passenger can just go and you can ask the experts. You can ask the expedition team because they've all got their specialties and whatever they may be. So the citizen science thing takes up a substantial amount of deck space on board Amazon. So for the people that are truly curious about the geology and the wildlife, that really stood out to me.
Yeah. And it's comfortable. It's inviting. It's not a sterile laboratory space. There's things on the walls and there's specimens and interactive screens. And I was actually just before this, as I was on a call with two guests who were going to be joining us this summer, sailing through the Northwest Passage, 23
Yes.
days. They'd previously been to Antarctica with a different company, and as they were asking about the amenities on the ship, I said, on the last ship, I'm guessing the main deck was like a bar, a restaurant, a grand foyer type thing. Well, the way that we're different is that the nucleus, like the beating heart of the ship, is this science center, and there's 20 microscopes and this massive interactive map and, narwhal tusks, replica narwhal tusks and books. And
Yeah.
you can always find it's a buzzing with life all the time.
Awesome. And I'll for folks that are watching and they want to know more about this vessel, on our YouTube channel, we do actually have a ship tour video of Royal Amazon. So have at her. And so we'll stop talking about these remarkable vessels and more about where they go. So
Yes.
I think Antarctica is probably a no-brainer, but let's start there and maybe tell us where else these ships get to. Where do you all service around the world?
Yeah, so Antarctica is our largest destination, and it's one that really aligns with our science focus. As you probably know, Bob, it was a continent that was dedicated for peace and science, and one of the largest international treaties of its time, and still through this day. And so we're kind of continuing in that legacy. A destination. Actually, I'll speak about two destinations. The first one I want to highlight that's front of mind for me always, but for others right now, is Greenland. So we just became the first company to draw the connection with the new air route. So they opened a new airport on my birthday, actually, November 28th of last year. Myself and our CEO Gebhard were invited to join that inaugural flight. And starting this summer, there's going to be flights from Newark, just outside of New York, directly to Nuuk, Greenland, the capital of Greenland. It's a 4-hour flight. Greenland, the access to Greenland is being revolutionized. You used to have to fly to Reykjavik or Copenhagen and then come all the way back over. It can be up to 4 days at sea. And now travelers from North America can just get right into the action. And it's comparable to Antarctica. You have these towering icebergs, glaciers, just absolute natural majesty. But then you have the human side. You have people who've lived there for thousands of years who've got a really interesting story to tell, and they love welcoming people to their shores.
Well, that's actually I hadn't really thought about that before. I mean, it's as spectacular as Antarctica is. It's a commitment, right? You're I don't know, 10 or 11 hours, depending on where you're flying out of, just to get to Buenos Aires, and then it's another 4 hours past there. Then you got to go across the Drake. And again, totally worth it. But all of a sudden, Greenland is much more accessible, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you don't have to be away for 3 weeks necessarily to see it. And something I hadn't thought about, it's totally obvious now that you pointed it out, but there's people with culture on Greenland where, Antarctica is not inhabited other than people that live at the research station.
Exactly. And when I travel, you're probably the same. Many of your viewers probably feel similarly, and it's hard to find this. It's hard to discover it dependably. But you want to feel welcome. You want to feel like you're part of the story, and that there's a human connection. And Greenland is one of the most welcoming destinations I've ever been to, because tourism is such a emerging part of their economy and their
Yes.
future and their journey towards independence. You're kind of part of that. So people in Greenland are super enthusiastic about tourism.
Awesome. That's and I think too, when you're over that way, I think some of I haven't looked at all your itineraries there, but some are right in around Greenland, and then some of those head into the Northwest Passage. So that's the Canadian Arctic coast. And
Yes,
do you go all the way?
we do actually. Yep. We got one there's you can go either direction. You can go from Alaska to Greenland or Greenland to Alaska. We call it across the top of the world or through the Arctic labyrinth are the voyage names, and I think they encapsulate that experience perfectly. It's an absolutely epic kind of connoisseur's route to be able to sail through the Northwest Passage and become a part of history.
Yeah, I've not done that one. I've heard other people describe it as almost like a safari, right? So that you're looking for certain animals and whales, and there are in on the north. I call it the northern coast of Canada. It's a whole archipelago of islands, but
Yeah.
the communities there are communities that you visit on your way across the top of the world between Alaska and Greenland.
Yes, very remote communities. Some as few as just a few hundred inhabitants, so you can really create, personal connections. And it's also important that when traveling to these areas, people really scrutinize the companies that they're traveling with and their approach to community relations. Because the last thing you want to do is show up and be guided by a company who doesn't cherish and value those partnerships. And I want to avoid bringing it back to Roald Amundsen because we spend a lot of time on him. But
Yeah.
these European explorers, especially the Norwegian ones, were amongst the first to acknowledge and integrate with the indigenous peoples of those areas, and partially what led to their success.
Yeah. And when you talk about sustainability, that's something we quite often hear about environmental sustainability, which HX does very,
Yeah,
very well, and you're welcome to comment on
yeah,
that, of course. But sustainability has other aspects as well, and the ones that are often overlooked are cultural sustainability and economic sustainability. So,
yeah,
I mean, the best example is in some of the Caribbean islands that the big cruise ships call in at. They own all the stores on the pier. The cruise lines do, right? So
yeah.
how much money that is being spent by cruise ship passengers in some of these Caribbean islands actually gets retained in the community versus what you all do in these, remote places in Greenland and Canada and other places around the world.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, recently we've been working with some of the native corporations and groups in Alaska,
Hmm.
and we're trying to develop more meaningful relationships there. And we keep on in these conversations. They say, well, usually the cruise companies come and they tell us what they want. Like please give us a costume performance and a drum dance, or we want a powwow or something, and we create that for them. And we're saying we want you to tell us how you would like to represent yourself. And through many of these conversations, it's been hard to like rewire that approach. But as people realize what we're actually saying, it's just been overwhelming enthusiasm for that approach, because traditionally in a lot of these areas, it has been larger companies coming in who have very set perspectives of how they want their guest experience to be, where we do the opposite. We go and we ask the communities and we involve the communities. And so we're a platform for them to share their own stories with the people who've
Excellent.
chosen to come to those locations.
I'm glad you brought up Alaska because it's often overlooked as a destination for more remote cruising. So,
Yeah.
everybody's heard about the Alaska run. Many people have taken an Alaskan cruise on one of the mass market lines. How would an Alaskan cruise be different going on HX than it would be going, and there's nothing wrong with these other products, but how would it be different than going on a mainstream cruise line versus HX?
Yeah, I think that the main thing I would highlight is that our ships that operate on the Alaskan coast, Amundsen and Nansen, they can carry up to 500 passengers. Often will sail 400. One of the beauties of that size of passengers is we don't need to sell 95% capacity. So just because for the economics to work, whereas smaller lines you really need to fill every bunk, so to speak, to meet your target. So yeah, we'll be sailing 400 people, and fits right between the two parts of the cruise sector in Alaska. You get what's called the Jones Act ships, which are the ships that are operating exclusively usually in Southeast Alaska, and they're generally quite small, like 12, 24, 40 type people. Or you have the larger lines that are, 800, 900, 1,000, 2,000. And so we're right in this sweet spot where we can do all the same activities that the smaller ships can do. We can go out in the Zodiacs, you can see bears, you can experience wildlife. But you have a comfort and similar or comparable amenities to what you might find on more spacious ships. So it's a really unique balance, and that also allows us to go to smaller ports, develop more intimate connections. So we don't typically go to Juneau. We don't typically go to the really large ports as a area of focus for our itineraries.
So it's kind of the Goldilocks option for some people. It's yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, because again, probably most people's perception of Alaska cruise is fly to Vancouver, visit Juneau, Skagway, Ketchikan, get out in Anchorage, or there's some that go round trip out of Seattle as well. And I've looked at your itinerary there, and I've done, I don't know, upwards of a dozen Alaska cruises, so I feel I actually know Alaska, British Columbia fairly well. And there's some places that HX goes that I haven't heard of, and that really excites me because, if I've been there a dozen times and I haven't heard of it, it's remote. And it's and you get to, I seem to remember your itineraries, they do go between Vancouver and Anchorage, if I remember. Is
Correct,
that right? Yeah. So your air logistics are easy. So you're not flying in, you're not trying to fly into Sitka, Alaska, which is a lovely place, but awful hard to get to. So, Vancouver and Anchorage are both major airports. So your flight logistics are easy. And so, maybe Alaska, for folks that are wondering what this expedition stuff is all about and whether it's right for them, what a great way to take it for a test drive, right? Go to Alaska. And if you've been there before, you're going to get a different experience.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to that accessible adventure. You're going to a very attractive destination. You're doing it in a different way. You don't have to spend 3 weeks trekking to the other end of the earth. Mm-hmm. Typically, some people have asked me, what's the best expedition for people to consider as kind of their gateway, their entry into this segment of the industry. And typically, what happens is people become attracted to Antarctica. They hear about it. It's so unfamiliar, and the only way you can get there is by expedition vessel. So that's typically the entry point. But it's actually, if you were to design the perfect kind of pathway for people, I think a place like Alaska or Greenland would be the ultimate design for people who want to familiarize themselves with the industry. And then maybe you get inspired to do a trip to Antarctica or Svalbard, or through the Northwest Passage, or to the Galapagos, which are all destinations that we feel super, super inspired by and proud to operate in.
Excellent. And the Galapagos is the last one. We've got lots of stuff on our website on Galapagos, because Sue and I were actually there a few months ago. So happy to chat through Galapagos with anyone, but I won't tap your brain on that one for today. Is there anywhere else? So we talked about Antarctica, Greenland, Northwest Passage, Alaska. That's the lineup, isn't it? Is it this one?
Well,
sorry, go ahead. Yep.
That's Svalbard. So Svalbard was our first destination. So that's like the original HX destination, and that's an archipelago about 400 miles north of the northernmost point of the coast of Norway.
Wow.
And this is the realm of the polar bear. This is, some of the settlements up there are the northernmost post office, the northernmost, all these sorts of things. And it's super remote, and it's a destination that's perfect for expedition cruising.
Yeah.
And because the main community there, Longyearbyen, you can fly into. It's got quite a functional airport. The West Coast stays ice-free year-round because of the Gulf Stream. Mm-hmm. And you can head out and explore around the islands and have some fantastic wildlife, fantastic scenery. And that's a destination that nobody does better than us. It's part of our DNA, and something that I would really encourage people to consider as well.
Summertime destination for you, or do you do Northern Lights up there as well?
So you're setting me up perfectly here. So we do spring to late summer, early fall in Svalbard. But we just launched a new program in northern Norway, which is a 7-day expedition cruise from Tromsø. And that is currently running starting in January 2026, going through March, which is the peak Northern Light season. So this is very, very close to our heritage. As you mentioned, our friends at Hurtigruten are doing that traditional coastal route, which goes all the way from Bergen to Kirkenes. But we're focusing only in and around the surrounding areas of Tromsø. So Lofoten, Senja, Vesterålen, the Lyngen Alps, and offering very immersive and quite personalized experiences like snowshoeing, cooking over an open fire with Norwegian chefs, having a sauna and cold plunge opportunity. We're renting out. There's actually a Hurtigruten museum, which captures a lot of our story, and we're renting it out for the evening and hosting a dinner in this museum as part of that experience.
Cool.
And so it's a smaller ship. It's only up to around 150 people that we can accommodate. So we're renting out the whole museum. We're going to have local musicians and food. I think it'll just be a really, really distinct activity there.
And that's round trip Tromsø, yeah?
Round trip Tromsø, yeah.
Okay.
Winter wonderland.
Yeah, it's actually great. When we talk about Northern Lights, we get a lot of inquiries about Northern Lights, and people are all, well, can I see them on an Alaska cruise? Well, no, because the Alaska cruise ship season doesn't run when it's dark out. It needs to be dark to see the Northern Lights. So that sounds like a fantastic option for folks looking to catch some Northern Lights, and it's almost guaranteed. I mean, we're talking about weather, so there are no guarantees, but at that latitude at that time of year, it's got to be about as close to a guarantee as you can get.
You know what? I'll do you one better. It is guaranteed because we have Northern Lights promise.
Yes.
I'm not going to go into the details, but it's essentially if you don't see Northern Lights, I'm pretty sure you're invited back, or there's some significant consideration. We're so confident that you'll see Northern Lights that we put our stamp.
You heard it here first.
And I want to tell one quick story about Tromsø.
Yes.
Just going to illustrate the winter wonderland nature. I was on an industry committee dedicated to community engagement for a number of years. And at one point we had a meeting in Tromsø. And I grew up in Toronto, Canada. I spent a lot of time in the Arctic. But Tromsø was the place where I saw my tallest snowbank. It was a low-rise apartment building that was 2 or 3 stories tall. And the snowbank went up to the roof line. It was literally like, I swear, it was like 20-something feet tall snowbank on the side of one of these buildings. So that was a grade A winter experience there.
That's fantastic. So for people that are still maybe wondering, Alex, what does a typical expedition cruise day look like? Because it might be different than what if folks have done sort of mass market mainstream cruising. It's quite a bit different.
Yeah. So every day is unique, first and foremost. Our teams, analyze the weather and the geography of a given place. But we try and bring the destination to life. Everything's centered around the destination. So we have a rich education program. So there's always programming on board the ship related to science and education. But we also get people off the ship as often as possible. So if you're in Greenland, for example, you could be in a fjord in the morning and get off and go for a Zodiac cruise or a hike, or some people might choose to go in a kayaking group. And in the afternoon, we might be in a small community. And when we're in communities, some people choose to explore independently. But everywhere we go, we have an included excursion. And so that could be a wilderness excursion that we're running, or it could be an excursion that we offer in collaboration with a local partner. So actually, just a few months ago, we announced that we were going all inclusive. So our tagline is "Adventure is all inclusive." So we try and offer these excursions. People can choose to customize their experience if there's something specific that they're interested in. And then you come back on board, you decompress from your adventures, you share stories of the day, and there'll usually be some evening programming on board as well, which could be entertainment focused, storytelling. It could be educational. And all around, these are very dynamic days, but I also want to emphasize that they're customizable to suit various levels of interest or curiosity.
These cruises are busy if you do them well, but for folks that maybe don't want to be scheduled every minute of every day, it's more like a menu than a schedule.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Perfect way to put it.
The expedition space has grown exponentially in the last few years, which is nothing but good from where I sit. So why HX? There's lots of different opportunities for folks to get into the remote corners of the world. Why HX?
Yep, I agree. There's a lot of choice out there, and people should think carefully about which line they may decide to go with. For us, there's three things really that I'd emphasize. One is we're unrivaled when it comes to experience in the space. You know, been doing it since the 1800s. It's not something that anyone else can say, and we're very proud of that legacy. And you see it come through in how we carry ourselves. You know, the pride that our captains take in navigating through narrow channels and kind of honoring that heritage. That's a big part of who we are. The second one is we're made for the curious traveler. So people who want to learn, who want to discover, who want to make the most of the time they have in these destinations. Because the reality is that for the majority of people, you'll only go to these places once. You might have saved substantially, you might have reached a point in your career or your personal life where you have the ability to do this.
Yes.
And we want to satisfy your every curiosity, and that's through learning, but also through experience. And then the final one is we're the leaders in mindful adventure, and we touched on this. Often the word is sustainability, but that has so many different dimensions. And the one that really speaks to my heart is around the cultural engagement, around working with locals. I actually am part of an Inuit-led not-for-profit that focuses on community engagement. And when I joined HX, they said, how can we support this? So every spring, I join a team that goes to a community in East Greenland to work with them to help their tourism development. And that's something that people can experience by traveling with HX as well.
That's fantastic. So folks that are looking for more information on HX Expedition Cruising, so certainly we can help you out. Our contact information is below. If you want to visit HX website, the website for HX, there we go. We'll move to the passive voice. The website for HX, it is it's travelhx.com. Have I got that right?
You nailed it.
Okay.
Travelhx.com.
Yeah. So for all the stuff that Alex was and I were talking about today, that would be fantastic. Again, we would love to help you out with these things. We know these products and destinations very well, and we can usually get you something you can't get in other places because we've got great relationships with Alex's company. So with that, Alex, I thank you very much for taking the time today, and we'll see you out there on the seas.
Sounds good. My pleasure, Bob.
Thanks, Alex.